Victor Hale did not knock. He never knocked. Knocking implied that the person on the other side had a right to decide whether to let you in, and Victor had long since decided that Clara had no such rights. He came through the front door of their house on a Tuesday evening in late November, and the first thing he did was overturn the small wooden table she had set for supper. The bowl of potato soup she had spent an hour making hit the floor and shattered, and the sound of it, that sharp final crack, was the sound Clara had learned to brace herself for without even knowing she was bracing. She was 7 months pregnant. She grabbed the edge of the counter and held on. "Where is it?" Victor said. He wasn't shouting. That was the thing people never understood when Clara tried to explain it later. He was never shouting. His voice was always level, almost conversational, which made it worse somehow than if he had been raging. A man who raged could exhaust himself. Victor never exhausted himself. "Where's what?" Clara asked. "The letter from your sister." She had hidden it under the floorboard beneath the wash basin. She had not written back. She had not even finished reading it before she heard his wagon outside. But he knew it existed, which meant someone in town had told him, which meant she had no privacy left anywhere in the world, not even inside her own skull. "There's no letter," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the kitchen, took her by the arm, not hard enough to leave a mark, never hard enough to leave a mark, and walked her to the chair beside the cold fireplace and sat her down in it. "Clara," he said, crouching in front of her so their eyes were level, "you are going to have my child in 2 months. I would like to have this conversation like two reasonable people. Can we do that?" She said yes, because what else do you say? He found the letter 20 minutes later. He read it standing at the window with his back to her, and she watched his shoulders and tried to read them the way she had learned to read everything about him. Every shift in posture, every small tightening of the jaw, every quiet breath that meant something was coming. When he folded the letter and put it in his coat pocket, she knew she was not getting it back. "Your sister thinks you're unhappy," he said. "I'm not unhappy. She wants you to come stay with her after the baby." "I don't want to go." He turned around then, and he was smiling. Victor had a smile that could convince a roomful of strangers that he was the most decent man they had ever encountered. Clara had once been convinced by that smile herself. That felt like something that had happened to a different woman. "Good," he said. "Then we understand each other." She had the baby on a night in January when the temperature dropped so hard and so fast that the water in the basin beside the bed froze before the midwife had finished packing her bag to leave. The midwife was a woman named Dottie Marsh, who was 60 years old and had delivered most of the children in Harlan County, and she held the baby girl for exactly as long as it took to determine she was healthy before handing her back to Clara and not quite meeting her eyes. Everyone in Harlan County knew about Victor Hale's household. They just didn't say so out loud. Clara named the baby Rose. Victor had wanted a boy. He did not say this directly, but she could see it in the way he looked at the baby. That measuring look that seemed to be calculating the future and finding it insufficient. He was pleasant about it, in the way he was pleasant about everything. In the way that made Clara feel like she was imagining the displeasure, like she was the one who was unreasonable, like she was the one who needed to do better. She did not sleep the first 3 nights of Rose's life. She sat in the chair beside the crib Victor had bought, the nicest crib in the county. He'd made sure of that. Made sure everyone who came to see the baby saw what kind of man he was, what kind of father. And she watched her daughter breathe and thought about the letter from her sister and what it would cost to write one back. She thought about it for 6 weeks. Then on a morning in late February, when Victor left before sunrise to ride to the county seat on business that would keep him away for 3 days, Clara got out of bed and began to pack. She did not take much. She took the baby, the warmest blanket she could find, 3 changes of clothes for herself, the small amount of money she had managed to hide in the lining of her winter coat over the course of 2 years, $17.40, and her mother's silver thimble, which was the only thing she owned that had not been given to her by Victor, and therefore felt like it actually belonged to her. She did not take the letter from her sister. She had memorized the address. What she had not done, no, could not have done, had no way of predicting, was anticipate the storm. It came down out of the north sometime during the second night of her traveling, when she was still 40 miles from the nearest town that lay in the direction of her sister's place. She had a horse, a dun mare she had chosen because the mare was steady and not given to panic, But no horse alive was built for what came down that night. The wind hit like something physical, like a wall, and the temperature went with it, dropping 20 degrees in what felt like an hour. Clara pulled Rose inside her coat and kept riding. She lost the road somewhere after midnight. She didn't realize it at first. The snow had covered everything so thoroughly that there was no road anymore, just white in every direction, white and dark, and the sound of wind that was so loud it felt like it had weight. She turned the mare in what she thought it was north, and the mare went east, and then turned again, and Clara had no idea anymore which direction she was facing. She was thinking about the baby, not about herself, just about the baby. Rose had stopped crying about an hour ago, and that frightened Clara more than the crying had, because a baby going quiet and cold like this could mean too many things. "Stay with me," Clara said to her, not because she thought Rose could understand, but because talking was something to do. "You stay with me. You hear me? You stay right here." The mare slowed. Clara looked up and saw the barn. It was old, or it looked old, dark wood, a roof that sagged on one side, no light anywhere near it. But there was a structure attached to it, further back, with a single lamp burning in a window, and the smoke from a chimney, and Clara turned the mare toward those lights with the particular ferocity of a woman who has run out of every option except the one in front of her. She did not think about who might be inside. She did not think about whether it was safe. She got the barn door open and got the mare inside out of the wind, and she slid down from the saddle, and her legs gave out when she hit the ground. She caught herself on the mare's flank and stayed there for a moment, just breathing, just trying to remember how her body worked. Rose made a sound against her chest, small, not a cry, just a sound. And Clara held on to that sound like it was a rope thrown across water. She found a corner of the barn with clean straw and got down into it with the baby and pulled every blanket she had around them both and held Rose against her chest and told her over and over that they were all right, that they were safe, that nobody was going to find them here. She almost believed it. She was still there when the barn door opened. Caleb Whitmore had not gone to bed yet. He rarely did before 11, not because he had things to do after dark, but because the house got loud at night in the way that empty houses do. All the small sounds that during the day you don't notice. The creak of a board settling, the tick of the stovepipe cooling, the wind working at a loose piece of siding near the kitchen window. And at night those sounds filled up the space where something else used to be. And Caleb had found over the years that if he sat up long enough to get truly exhausted, he could fall asleep fast enough that he didn't have to hear them. He had been sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold and was not going to get reheated, doing the kind of nothing that he had become expert at when the sound came. He heard it through the wall of the house, faint and almost lost under the wind, and for a moment he thought he had imagined it. He sat very still and listened, and it came again. A baby crying. Caleb Whitmore was 41 years old, and he had not heard a baby cry in 6 years, and the sound of it went through him like something physical, like cold water thrown at his face, and he was on his feet before he had consciously decided to stand up. He took the rifle from beside the door. He put on his coat. He went outside. The cold was vicious. He crossed the yard to the barn with his head down against the wind and got the door open and stepped inside. And the first thing he saw was the horse. A dun mare he didn't recognize, still saddled, shivering in the middle of his barn. And then he followed the sound and found the woman in the corner. She looked up at him with the particular expression of someone who has gone too far past fear and come out the other side of it into something that isn't quite calm but isn't panic either, just a flat, steady attention. Her eyes were on the rifle, then on his face, then back on the rifle. "I'm not going back," she said. Her voice was steadier than it had any right to be, given that she was sitting in a stranger's barn in the middle of a February blizzard with a newborn pressed against her chest and straw in her hair, and that particular look of someone who has not slept in 2 days and is running entirely on something that isn't exactly courage, but functions like it when courage runs out. Caleb looked at her. He looked at the baby. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at him with the absolute uncritical attention that very new babies have, the kind that doesn't know yet to be afraid. "Where are you going back to?" he said. "It doesn't matter. I'm not going." He lowered the rifle. "I'm not asking you to." She watched him. He could see her trying to figure out what category to put him in. He understood that. He didn't blame her for it. "The baby needs to be warm," he said. "You both do. Come inside." "I don't know you." "No, you don't." He looked at the mare. Your horse needs water and feed. I'll see to that after, but you need to come inside first." She didn't move for a long moment. He waited. He had learned patience the way most men learn it, through loss, through all the things you couldn't fix no matter how fast you moved. "My name is Clara," she finally said. "Caleb Whitmore." He didn't offer his hand. He could see she wasn't ready for that. "Can you stand?" She could, barely. I didn't reach for her. He could see she wasn't ready for that either, but he stayed close enough that she could have steadied herself against him if she'd needed to. She didn't. She got up on her own and got her legs under her and held Rose against her chest and walked past him toward the barn door. At the door, she stopped. "If you're going to send me back," she said, not turning around, "tell me now. Don't wait until morning. Don't wait until I've slept. Tell me now so I can decide what to do." Caleb pulled the barn door open against the wind. "Nobody's sending you anywhere tonight," he said. "Let's get you warm first. Everything else can wait." The house was warmer than she had expected. He had a good stove in the kitchen, and it was burning hot, and Clara stood in front of it with Rose and felt the heat come back into her hands and her face and her feet, and was surprised by how much it hurt, the way warmth always hurts when it comes back to places that have been too cold too long. Caleb put water on to heat. He didn't fuss over her, didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer, didn't stand too close. He moved around his kitchen with the particular economy of a man who has lived alone long enough that he doesn't waste motion, getting what was needed without ceremony. He set a cup of hot water in front of her and a tin of dried herbs that made a passable tea. "I don't have milk," he said, "or sugar." "This is fine." She wrapped both hands around the cup. "Thank you." He sat across the table and looked at the baby. Clara watched him do it, watched the way his face changed when he looked at Rose, something that moved through his expression and then was gone, like a cloud crossing and crossing back. And she wondered about it but didn't ask. There were things you didn't ask, with people you just met in barns during blizzards. There were rules about that even if nobody had written them down. "How old is she?" he said. 6 weeks? He nodded. He didn't say anything else for a while. The wind worked at the house from outside. Clara could hear it, that continuous low assault, and she thought about where she had been 2 hours ago and felt something that she did not have a name for yet. Not gratitude exactly, not relief exactly, something between and underneath both. "I'm not going to be trouble to you," she said. "When the storm lets up, we'll go." Caleb looked at her over his coffee cup. "Where?" "My sister's. She's in—" She stopped. She had learned not to say out loud the names of the people she was going toward. She wasn't sure yet if that habit was still necessary. "East of here, a few days' ride. In February, when the storm lets up." He didn't argue with her. She noticed that. He had the quality that some men had, that very few men had. The quality of not arguing about things that didn't need arguing yet. "There's a room at the back," he said. "Nothing special, but the bed's got good blankets." Clara looked at him. She was calculating, the way she had learned to calculate everything. What things cost, what they would be asked to cost later. "I'm not—" she started. "It's a room with a door that locks from the inside," he said, and his voice didn't change when he said it, didn't shift or tighten, just delivered the information and let it sit there. "There's a key on the nail by the door. Take it with you." She looked at him for another moment. "All right," she said. "I'll check." She slept for 4 hours. When she woke, it was still dark and Rose was hungry, and Clara fed her and lay in the dark room listening to the storm and thinking. She thought about Victor. She thought about how he would come home from the county seat and find the house empty, and what his face would do in that moment. Not rage. Victor never raged. Just that stillness that was somehow worse. That quality he had of becoming very quiet when he was most dangerous. She thought about how long she had. She thought about the 40 miles she had already covered and the miles still ahead, and whether the mare was recovered enough yet to travel again, and what she would do if she couldn't get to her sister before Victor found her. She did not let herself think about the possibility that she wouldn't make it. She had gotten this far. She had gotten Rose out. Those were facts, not feelings, and facts didn't argue back. In the morning, she heard Caleb in the kitchen before she heard anything else. The sound of the stove being fed and water being put on, the small, ordinary sounds of a person starting a day. She lay there and listened to those sounds and something about them, their regularity, their normalcy. The sheer fact of another person existing in an adjacent room, made the tightness in her chest ease just slightly, like a knot loosening one loop without fully releasing. She got up. She unlocked the door. She went to the kitchen. Caleb was at the stove with his back to her, and he didn't turn around immediately when she came in, just said, "There's coffee, oatmeal in about 10 minutes." And she understood that he was giving her the choice of whether to be seen yet, whether to be in the room on her own terms. And she stood in the doorway and breathed through that small, unexpected kindness and said, "Thank you." He turned then, and there was that look again when he saw the baby in her arms. That movement in his face that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite longing, but lived in that territory between them. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Some." "That's better than nothing." She sat at the table. He put coffee in front of her. Outside the kitchen window, the storm was still going, the world still entirely white, and she watched it and thought, one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, just get through this hour. "You don't have to tell me anything," Caleb said. He was standing at the stove with his back to her again, stirring the oatmeal. "About where you came from, who you're running from. None of it. That's your business." Clara looked at the back of his head. "Most people would ask. Most people aren't involved. You're involved. I'm in your house." He turned to look at her over his shoulder. "That was my choice. Not a debt." She was quiet for a moment. "His name is Victor Hale," she said. She didn't know why she said it. She hadn't planned to, but the name had been sitting in her chest like a stone for so many hours, and there was something about this kitchen, this man, this particular morning, that made her want to put the stone down somewhere outside herself just long enough to remember what it felt like to breathe without it. Caleb didn't react to the name, just listened. "He's a wealthy man," she said. "He knows everyone in Harlan County. They all think very highly of him." She paused. "He would like Rose back. He would like me back so I can take care of Rose. He doesn't see much difference between those two things." The oatmeal bubbled. Caleb took the pot off the heat. "How far is Harlan County from here?" he said. "About 50 miles west." He set the pot on the table and sat down across from her. "Storm's going to break tomorrow," he said. "Maybe late tomorrow. You'll need another day after that before traveling safe." He looked at the window. "That gives you some time." She understood what he was telling her. She understood what he was offering, which was the same thing he had offered last night. Not rescue, not a solution, just time. Just the next hour. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He picked up his coffee cup and looked into it for a moment. "I had a family once," he said. "I know what it costs to lose one." He didn't say anything else. She didn't ask. Some things you learn to know without being told. You learn to read the particular weight that some men carry, the weight of something that happened to them that they have decided they're going to carry without putting down, because putting it down would mean it was gone, and they can't afford for it to be entirely gone yet. She looked at him across the table, this hard-faced, quiet man who had brought her in out of a blizzard without asking her for anything and given her a room with a lock, and sat across from her now with his coffee and his grief and his absolutely practical intentions. She thought, whatever happens next, this was real. This happened. Whatever Victor takes from me, he can't take this. She held Rose against her chest and watched the snow through the window and let herself sit still for just a few minutes in the warmth of someone else's house. The storm broke the next evening, as Caleb had said it would. Clara had spent the day watching him work. Not idly, she had helped where she could, had done the dishes and swept the floor, and made herself useful in the small ways available to a woman with a 6-week-old baby. And she had noticed things. The photograph on the mantel in the room he called the parlor, a woman and a small boy. The photograph turned slightly to the side as if he couldn't quite commit to facing it directly. The second bedroom with the closed door that he did not open and did not explain. The way he moved through his own house like a man navigating around furniture he couldn't see, careful of things that weren't there anymore. She did not ask him about any of it. At supper, she made cornbread from flour she found in his pantry, without asking, because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because it gave her hands something to do. And he ate it with the slightly surprised expression of someone encountering an unexpected thing and not quite knowing how to account for it. "It's good," he said. "My mother's recipe." He nodded. He cut another piece. Something about that small gesture, the second piece of cornbread, the fact of it, the absolute ordinariness of it, hit Clara somewhere behind her sternum, and she looked down at Rose in her lap and breathed carefully through the feeling until it passed. After supper, he said, "There's something you should know." She looked up at him. "The nearest town is Millhaven, 12 miles east." He looked at his hands. "I don't go to town much anymore, but I have a neighbor about 8 miles north, a woman named May Sutton. She's got a telephone. If you need to get word to your sister, that's the way to do it." Clara had not thought about a telephone. She had been thinking in terms of distance, miles, the horse, the idea of a telephone, of being able to reach her sister's voice across all that space in seconds, made something collapse inside her in a way she hadn't been prepared for. "I'll take you up tomorrow," he said, watching her, "if you want." She looked at the window. The snow had stopped. The sky outside was clearing to black. "Yes," she said. "I want." He nodded, picked up his coffee cup, set it down. "You should also know," he said, "that May talks." Clara looked at him. "She's kind," he said. "Genuinely, but she talks. By the time we get back here, most of Millhaven will know there's a woman and a baby at the Whitmore place." He said it without apology or embellishment. "I thought you should know that before we go, so you can decide." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Victor had connections everywhere. She already knew that. The story would get out one way or another. It always did, with Victor, because Victor had spent years making sure that everyone in 100 miles knew his name and thought well of it. The question was never whether the story got out. The question was whether she got far enough ahead of it. "I need to reach my sister," she said. "All right. And then I need to leave, as soon as she says she can take us." Caleb nodded slowly. "And if he comes here before that?" Clara looked at him. She could see that he had already thought about this, had been thinking about it since the night she arrived, had probably been running the numbers quietly behind his steady expression, the way practical people do when they've decided to accept a problem they haven't fully solved yet. "He will come here," she said. "If he finds out where I am, he'll come." "I know. You understand what I'm telling you. He's not a man who stops." Caleb looked at her with those quiet, dark eyes and said, with the absolute flatness of a man who has already made his decision and is no longer interested in debating it, "I've been through worse." She believed him. She didn't know why, exactly. She had known him for 36 hours. She knew almost nothing about him, except that he had a dead family and a good stove, and the quality of stillness that either meant peace or grief, and she wasn't sure yet which it was in his case. But she believed him. And in the world she was living in, belief was a scarce resource, and she did not waste it. "All right," she said. Outside, the last of the clouds cleared and the stars came out, hard and bright and cold as ice, and Clara sat in the warmth of Caleb Whitmore's kitchen with her daughter in her arms and thought, one more day, just get through one more day. She was already thinking about what came after. She couldn't help it. She was a woman who had survived this long by thinking about what came after, by staying 3 steps ahead of the thing that was coming. Victor would come back from the county seat. He would find the house empty. He would ask questions, quietly, pleasantly, with that smile that made people want to answer him. And someone would know something, because someone always did, because Clara had learned that privacy was not something a woman in her situation got to have. And then he would come. She held Rose closer and let herself feel, for just a moment, the weight of that coming. Then she packed the feeling away in the place she kept things that she needed to carry without showing. And she looked at the stars through the kitchen window, and she breathed and she prepared. May Sutton's house was 8 miles north, and Caleb drove the wagon there in the kind of post-storm silence that settles over the land after heavy snow, when the world seems to have used up all its noise and needs to rest. Clara sat beside him on the bench with Rose bundled inside her coat, and neither of them spoke much. There wasn't much to say. The cold was serious and the road was rough, and Caleb kept his eyes on the trail, and Clara kept her eyes on the horizon, which was the habit of a woman who had learned to watch for what was coming from a distance rather than wait for it to arrive. May Sutton was 63 years old and built like someone who had never once in her life taken the easy route anywhere. She opened the door before they had finished tying up the horse, because she had been watching from the window, and she looked at Clara with the particular attention of a woman who had seen enough of the world to recognize a particular kind of situation when it arrived on her doorstep. "Come in," she said, and the way she said it left no room for argument or preamble. Inside, she put coffee on and did not ask questions while the coffee heated, which Clara understood was its own kind of kindness. When the coffee was ready, and they were all sitting at May's kitchen table, May looked at Clara across the rim of her cup and said, "How old is she?" 6 weeks. May nodded. She looked at Rose with the softened expression that very old women sometimes have around very new babies, like they can see both ends of something from where they're standing. "She's healthy?" "Yes. You?" Clara hesitated just a fraction of a second. "I'm all right." May's eyes moved to Caleb, then back to Clara, and she did not say anything about what she had just noticed, which was everything. "Telephone's in the hall," she'd said. "I'll show you how to reach the operator. You give her the town and the exchange, and she'll connect you. Might take a few minutes." It took 11 minutes. Clara stood in May's narrow hallway with the earpiece pressed hard against her ear and listened to the clicking and buzzing of the connection being made across all those miles. And when she finally heard her sister's voice, Ruth's voice, cautious and confused because nobody called on a Tuesday morning without warning, Clara felt the thing she had been holding back for 6 weeks come up in her throat all at once, and she pressed her fist against her mouth until it passed. "It's me," she said. Ruth made a sound that wasn't a word. "I'm all right," Clara said. "Rose is all right. I need you to listen." She talked for 4 minutes. She told Ruth the bare minimum, that she had gotten out, that she was safe for the moment, that she needed a place to go and needed Ruth to be ready to take them in without asking too many questions right away. Ruth said yes before Clara had finished the sentence, and Clara had known she would, had known it for 2 years, had let that knowledge be the one small fixed point she could orient herself around when everything else was moving. "How soon?" Ruth said. 3 days? Maybe 4? I'll be here." A pause. "Clara, does he know where you are?" "Not yet." "Not yet," Ruth repeated, and her voice had gone flat in the way voices go flat when they're trying not to carry fear. "I'll get there before he knows," Clara said, with more certainty than she actually possessed. She hung up the telephone and stood in May's hallway for a moment with her hand still on the receiver, looking at the wall, and she let herself feel the whole weight of what she had just set in motion. Then she straightened her back and went back to the kitchen. Caleb looked at her when she came in. She gave him a small nod, and something in his expression settled. May, who had been very busy not looking at Caleb during the telephone call, was now refilling everyone's coffee with great concentration. "You'll stay for something to eat," she said. It was not a question. "We shouldn't impose," Clara said. "You're not imposing. I made too much biscuits this morning, and nobody to eat them." May set the coffee pot down and looked at Clara directly. "I'm not going to pry into your business, but if there's something you need, supplies, an extra blanket, anything, you tell me. I've got more than I need and less than I'd like to give." Clara looked at her. This woman she had met 40 minutes ago, who owed her nothing. "Thank you," she said, and meant it in a way she couldn't quite say fully. They stayed for an hour. By the time Caleb drove them back down the 8 miles to his ranch, Clara knew, without having been told explicitly, that May Sutton had already begun forming opinions. She could see it in the way the older woman had watched them together, not with judgment exactly, but with that particular attention of someone cataloging information they expect to need later. Caleb had been right. By nightfall, Millhaven would know. The knowing happened faster than even Caleb had predicted. The following morning, a man named Gerald Pratt rode up the drive at Caleb's place and sat on his horse in the yard and called out until Caleb came to the door. Gerald Pratt ran the feed store in Millhaven and was, as far as Caleb had ever been able to determine, primarily interested in other people's business as a substitute for having enough of his own. Clara stood just inside the front window and watched through the gap in the curtain. She could not hear everything, but she could hear the shape of it. The way Pratt's voice had that particular blend of concern and appetite that some people use when they want information and have learned to dress it up as neighborliness. Caleb stood on his porch with his arms crossed and let Pratt talk. He did not invite him in. He did not move from the doorway. After several minutes, Pratt rode away. Caleb came back inside and poured himself coffee without looking at Clara first, which she had already come to understand meant he was organizing his thoughts. "He wanted to know who you were," Caleb said. "What did you tell him?" "That you were passing through and the storm caught you and you needed shelter." He sat down. "He wanted to know where you were heading." "And?" "I told him it wasn't any of his concern." Clara looked at him. "He won't accept that." "No, he won't." She turned back to the window. The yard was empty, just snow and the bare skeleton of the cottonwood tree at the corner of the fence. But she had the feeling that the emptiness was temporary, that it was the kind of quiet that preceded something rather than the kind that followed. "How many people does Pratt talk to?" she asked. "Everyone he meets." She nodded slowly. She was running calculations again, that constant arithmetic of risk and time that had become her primary mode of thinking over the past 2 years. Victor has money. He'll put out word. He'll offer a reward, probably, or just make inquiries through the right people and let the money speak for itself. She paused. "He might already know I came in this direction. I took the east road out of Harlan County. Someone might have seen me." Caleb was quiet, listening. "I need to leave sooner than I planned," she said. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "Road's still rough. That mare of yours has got another day of rest in her before she's fit to travel hard." "I know." She turned away from the window. "I know that. I'm just—" She stopped. She pressed her hand against the back of a chair and held it there. "I spent 2 years making plans and having them not matter. I'm trying not to do that." Caleb looked at her for a moment. "One more day," he said. "Tomorrow morning, early, I'll ride with you as far as the county line." She shook her head. "You don't need to do that." "I know I don't need to. It'll cause you problems." "I'm already part of your problems," he said, without irritation, just factually. "Pratt's going to tell whoever asks that you were here. That's done. A few extra miles isn't going to make my position any different." Clara looked at him. She thought about arguing and then decided against it, because the truth was she wanted someone to ride with her. And the truth was she was tired, bone-tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. And the truth was that 6 weeks after having a baby in a house where she had been afraid every single day, she was still running on reserves she couldn't replenish fast enough. "All right," she said. Rose made a sound from the direction of the back room. Not a cry, just a small shifting sound, the kind that meant she was waking up from a nap and taking stock of the world. And Clara went to her, and behind her she heard Caleb pick up his coffee cup and go back to whatever quiet business he was always conducting with himself. That evening was the first time Clara saw it clearly. She had put Rose down in the back room after feeding her and had come back to the kitchen to start something for supper, and she had found Caleb standing in the doorway of the closed room, the second bedroom, the one he never opened, the one she had been carefully not asking about, with his hand on the door frame and his back to her. He didn't hear her come in. He stood there for a long moment, and she watched him in profile, the set of his shoulders, the way his head was slightly bowed. And she understood in that moment, with complete certainty, what was in that room. A child's room. His child's room. She backed up 3 steps and made some noise with a pot. And by the time she turned around again, he was no longer in the doorway, but was sitting at the table with that careful blank expression of a man who has just been somewhere he wasn't expecting to go and is trying to find his way back to the present. She put water on to boil and did not say anything. Neither did he. But something shifted in the room, some understanding that didn't need words to exist. And later when they ate supper, a simple thing, just beans and cornbread again, because that was what there was a different quality to the silence between them. Less careful, less like 2 strangers waiting for the other one to make a mistake. "How long ago?" she asked when supper was nearly finished. He looked up. "I'm sorry," she said. "I saw you in the hallway. I didn't mean to." He was quiet for a moment. 6 years ago. My wife, Eleanor, and my son, James. He was 3. What happened? Fever. One of those winters where the cold gets in before anyone's ready for it. He turned his coffee cup in his hands, that habit of his, that thing he did when he was feeling something he'd decided not to show. "It went through the county, took 7 children and 4 adults that season. He stopped. "We were just on the wrong side of it." Clara held Rose against her chest, that automatic protective gesture that she had performed 10,000 times in 6 weeks without thinking about it. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it with the particular weight of someone who understood what it meant to lose the shape of your own future. He nodded. He did not say it was all right, which she appreciated because it was not all right, and false comfort was something she had had enough of for one lifetime. "That's why you live alone," she said. Not a question. "I stayed because the ranch was mine, and I didn't have anywhere else to go that made more sense." He looked at the window. "And then staying became a habit." Clara thought about habits, about how many of her own habits had started as survival and turned into something she didn't know how to stop doing, even when the danger was different. "Rose likes you," she said. He looked at the baby, and there was that movement in his face again, that thing she had noticed from the beginning, that complicated weather system that passed through his expression whenever he looked at Rose. "She likes everyone," he said. "She's 6 weeks old." "She doesn't like everyone. She screamed for 20 minutes when I tried to hand her to the midwife." Clara looked down at Rose's sleeping face. "She hasn't cried since we came inside your barn." Caleb said nothing for a moment. "She's a good baby," he said finally. "She's the best thing I ever did," Clara said, and her voice was steady when she said it, steady and certain in a way that very few things in her life were certain right now. The next morning arrived with the particular gray light of an early March dawn in high country, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything yet, that holds the day in suspension between dark and whatever comes next. Clara had been awake since 5. She had fed Rose, repacked the few things she had brought inside from the saddlebag, and was standing in the kitchen with her coat on when Caleb came in from outside. He looked at her coat and the packed bag by the door. "I'll get the mare," he said. They were ready to leave in 40 minutes. Caleb had saddled his own horse and loaded some additional supplies. She hadn't asked him to, but she found an extra blanket tied behind her saddle and a cloth sack containing food for 2 days, and she did not argue about it because she was past the point of being able to afford pride about practical things. They were almost to the gate at the end of the lane when the wagon came up the road. It was not Gerald Pratt. It was a woman named Louise Alderman, who was the wife of the man who owned the mill in Mill Haven, and she was driving herself, which was unusual enough that Clara felt the small hairs on her arms rise before she understood why. Louise pulled her wagon up alongside them. She was a handsome woman in her mid-50s, dressed well, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to. She looked at Clara with the particular expression of a woman who has decided to say something unpleasant and is trying to decide how to say it. "Mrs. Hale," she said. Clara went very still. Caleb looked at Clara. "I beg your pardon," Clara said carefully. "Mrs. Victor Hale," Louise said. "That is who you are." This air was very cold. Rose was quiet inside Clara's coat. "What do you want?" Clara said. "To speak plainly." Louise folded her gloved hands in her lap. "I know who your husband is. My husband does business with him. Victor Hale is a man who gets what he's looking for, and what he's looking for right now is you." She paused. "I came to tell you that a rider came through Mill Haven yesterday evening asking about a woman with a baby. He had money. He spent it." Clara's stomach dropped. "How many people talked?" she said. "Enough." Louise glanced at Caleb, then back at Clara. "I'm not here to cause you harm, but you need to know that there's a good chance someone told him where you've been staying." Caleb said, "How long ago was the rider?" "Yesterday evening, 4 o'clock, roughly." Caleb did the math out loud. "He'd have ridden back to Harlan County or to wherever Hale is. Earliest Hale himself gets here is this afternoon." Clara looked at the road ahead, then at the road behind, then at the gray sky. "I can't make it to Ruth's in a day," she said. "Not a complaint, just a fact." "No," Caleb said. Louise had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone absorbing information. "There's another option," she said. They both looked at her. She seemed slightly uncomfortable. "My husband would kill me for saying this, but my opinion on Victor Hale has never been what my husband thinks it is, and I've held it long enough." She looked at Clara. "You could come to my house. He wouldn't look there first." Clara stared at her. "Why?" "Because I have a daughter," Louise said, and her voice was simple and tired. "And I've watched that man smile at her at every county social for 3 years, and it has never sat right with me." The morning was very quiet. "We'll stay at my place," Caleb said, before Clara could answer. "If Hale comes here, I'd rather face him on my own ground." Louise looked at him for a long moment. Something passed between them, some acknowledgement of a decision being made that could not be unmade. "You understand what you're doing," she said to him. "I understand well enough." Louise picked up her reins. "Then I'll say a thing to you plainly, Caleb Whitmore, that I'll deny saying if it ever comes up. Gerald Pratt is a talker, but he's also a coward. There are others in this town who are neither." She looked at him steadily. "If it comes to it, you won't be standing alone." She turned her wagon and drove back toward Millhaven without looking back. Caleb and Clara sat with their horses in the middle of the frozen lane for a moment, looking at the place where Louise's wagon had been. "Go back inside," Clara said. "I'll leave. If I go now, Clara. If I go now before he arrives, Clara." His voice was quiet, but it had an edge to it she hadn't heard before. "You have a 6-week-old baby and a horse that's been run through a blizzard and roads that are still rough in places. If he's coming today, you can't outrun him today." She knew that. She had known it while she was saying it. "If he takes Rose," she started. "He's not taking Rose." She looked at him. "I know you don't have a reason to believe that," he said. "We've known each other 3 days. I don't expect you to trust it." He looked at his own gate, at the lane, at the ranch behind them. "But I'm asking you to come back inside and let me handle this on my own ground." Clara sat with the wind cutting at her face and Rose warm against her chest, and the particular awful mathematics of a situation where every path had a cost. She had spent 2 years calculating costs. She had spent 2 years surviving by thinking 3 steps ahead and acting alone and not counting on anyone, because counting on anyone was a vulnerability she couldn't afford. She looked at Caleb. He was watching her with those steady, dark eyes, not trying to convince her of anything, not softening the situation with reassurances he couldn't back up. Just waiting, letting her decide. She turned her horse and rode back to the house. He came in the afternoon, not Victor himself, not yet, but 2 men she recognized as his, a man named Dyers, who managed his properties, and a younger man she didn't know, both of them riding good horses and wearing the kind of expression that meant they had been told to find something and had found it. Caleb was in the yard when they rode up. Clara watched from the kitchen window, Rose in her arms, and she felt the old cold certainty settle over her. That particular feeling she associated with Victor's world, the feeling of walls closing, of options narrowing, of the air becoming finite. Dyers said something to Caleb that she couldn't hear. Caleb crossed his arms and looked at them, and she could see from his posture, from the way he stood, the absolute stillness of it, the lack of any defensive or apologetic leaning, that he was not a man who felt himself to be in the wrong. Dyers said something else. He gestured toward the house. Caleb said something short, and then turned and walked back toward his front door without further discussion, and from the window Clara saw Dyers and the other man exchange a look that meant they hadn't expected that. Caleb came inside and closed the door. "They're going back for Hale," he said. "I know." He went to the window and looked out. The 2 riders were already moving back down the lane. "Tell me everything about him," Caleb said. "Everything that matters. What he'll say, how he'll say it, what he expects to happen when he walks onto someone's property." Clara sat down at the table. She set Rose on the blanket there and looked at her daughter's face for a moment, that face that had her own eyes and Victor's jaw and nothing else of him that she could see. Then she started talking. She talked for a long time. She talked about the Victor that Millhaven didn't know, the one behind the donations to the church building fund and the handshakes at the county fair, the one who had learned early that control was more effective than violence if you applied it correctly and consistently, and made the person you were controlling start to believe that the control was their own idea. She talked about what he would do when he arrived, the pleasantness of it, the reasonableness, the way he would make Caleb feel like the one who was being unreasonable, like the one who was causing a problem that could easily be solved if everyone would just calm down and be sensible. Caleb listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "He's done this before," he said. "With other people. Not just you." "Yes. People know. They just haven't said. He's very careful about who he lets see what, and he's generous. People who might say something have usually benefited from his generosity in some way." She looked at her hands. "It's not corruption exactly. It's more like he makes everyone feel like they owe him something, and when you feel like you owe someone, you look the other way." Caleb was quiet. He looked at the rifle above the door. "He's going to offer me money," he said. "Yes. And when I say no, he'll threaten your reputation. He's very good at suggesting things without saying them." Clara looked at him. "He'll make it sound like you've done something wrong. He'll make it sound like having me here is something shameful that you should be embarrassed about, and that the kind thing, the reasonable thing, is to let him take us home so we can all pretend this never happened. And if that doesn't work?" She met his eyes. "He has money, and he has friends, and he has a story that he's told for 3 years about what kind of man he is. And you're a man who's been alone on a ranch for 6 years and doesn't go to town much. She said it plainly, because she had to. He knows how to use that. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. He's coming here expecting me to be embarrassed, he said. Yes. That's his first mistake, Caleb said, and went to put more coffee on. Victor Hale arrived the next morning. Clara heard the horses before she saw them, 3 of them, moving up the lane at a pace that was neither hurried nor casual, but somewhere between the two, the pace of a man who has decided exactly how this is going to go and sees no reason to rush toward a conclusion he has already reached. She was in the kitchen feeding Rose when the sound came, and she looked up and felt the cold certainty of it move through her the way it always did, that particular dropping sensation in her stomach that she had spent 3 years learning to manage without showing. She went to the window. Victor rode in the middle. He was a large man, not fat, but substantial, with the kind of physical presence that filled whatever space he was in without appearing to try. He wore a good coat and a good hat, and he sat his horse with the ease of someone who had never once in his life been uncertain about his right to be wherever he was. The 2 men flanking him were not Dyers and the younger one from yesterday, but different men, larger, and Clara recognized one of them as a man named Cord, who worked for Victor in a capacity that had never been formally defined, but that she had always understood to be the capacity of someone who solved problems that couldn't be solved politely. Caleb was already outside. He had gone out 10 minutes ago, when the sound of the horses was still distant, and he was standing in his yard now, with his arms at his sides and his rifle leaning against the porch rail behind him, close enough to reach, far enough to not be a provocation. Clara had watched him go out, and she had understood the calculation in it, the same way she understood the calculation in everything Caleb did, which was that he thought before he moved, and he moved with purpose, and he did not waste gestures. Victor pulled his horse up and looked down at Caleb from the saddle for a moment without speaking. It was a thing he did, that pause. Clara knew it well, that moment of silence that was designed to establish who was waiting on whom. Caleb Whitmore, Victor said. His voice carried. It was a good voice, warm and measured, the voice of a man who understood that how you said something mattered as much as what you said. I've heard your name around the county over the years, never had occasion to meet. You've got one now, Caleb said. Victor smiled. He had a good smile, too. Clara pressed her back against the wall beside the window and held Rose against her chest and breathed. I appreciate you giving my wife shelter during the storm, Victor said. That was a Christian act, and I mean that sincerely. A woman alone with a newborn in that kind of weather. He shook his head, the gesture of a man troubled by what might have happened. I don't want to think about it. Then don't, Caleb said. A brief pause. The smile didn't change. I'd like to take Clara home now, Victor said, and the baby. I'm sure you understand. A man wants his family where he can look after them. Clara doesn't want to go. Victor's head tilted slightly. Did she say that? She did. Women say a lot of things when they're frightened and not thinking clearly. He said it without condescension, in the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone he was willing to be patient with. She's not been well since the birth. I'm sure you've seen that. She needs rest and proper care, and I can give her that at home. Caleb looked at him. She seems fine to me, he said. The smile held. Victor swung down from his horse in the easy way of a man who has decided that this particular conversation needs to happen on level ground. He handed his reins to Cord without looking at him, and he walked toward Caleb with his hands visible and open, the posture of a man who wanted to be seen as reasonable. Look, he said, dropping his voice slightly, as if what he was about to say was between the 2 of them and didn't need an audience. I don't know what she's told you. I don't know what story she's put together in her head. Clara is... He paused. She's had a difficult time. The pregnancy was hard. The birth was hard. And there's a kind of thinking that can come over a woman after a hard birth, where things look different to her than they are. I'm not blaming her. I'm not angry with her. I just want to bring her home and take care of her the way a husband should. Caleb was quiet for a moment. She's got scars on her arms, he said. Victor's expression did not change. Not a flicker. Clara had always marveled at that, at his absolute control over his own face, at the way he could hear something that should have broken the surface of his composure and simply not let it. She's a clumsy woman, Victor said. Always has been. I've worried about her hurting herself. I'll bet you have, Caleb said. The temperature between them changed. Still civil on the surface, still technically within the language of two men having a disagreement, but something underneath had shifted, and both of them knew it. Whitmore. Victor's voice dropped further, lost the warmth. I'm going to be straight with you, because I think you're a straightforward man, and I respect that. What you're doing right now is harboring another man's wife. That has a legal dimension and a social dimension, and neither of them are going to serve you well. I've got friends in this county, the kind of friends who sit on the bench and the kind of friends who own the paper. And I'm not threatening you. I'm just giving you the accurate picture of what happens if you make this into something it doesn't need to be. Is that what you're doing? Caleb said. I'm offering you a way out that preserves your dignity. Clara comes with me today. We call this a misunderstanding, and you go on living your life the way you've been living it. Nobody needs to know anything more than that. Caleb turned his head slightly and looked toward the house, and for a moment Clara thought he was looking at her through the window, and she pressed her hand flat against the glass without thinking. Then Caleb looked back at Victor. She's not going, he said. The pleasantness left Victor's face then. Not all at once, he was too controlled for that. But something drained out of it, like water through a small hole, slow enough that you might miss it if you weren't watching carefully. Clara had spent 3 years watching carefully. You're making an error, Victor said. Maybe. A significant one. Could be. Caleb picked up the rifle from the porch rail. He didn't point it, he just held it, the way a man holds a tool he's not using yet, but expects to need. I think it's time you got back on your horse. Cord moved. It was a small movement, just a shifting of weight, but Clara saw it from the window, and she knew what it meant. She had learned Victor's language down to its smallest gestures, the way you learn a language when your survival depends on comprehension. Cord, Victor said, without turning. Cord went still. Victor looked at Caleb for a long moment. Then he looked at the house, at the window where Clara was standing. He looked at her through the glass with that calm, searching expression that she knew better than her own reflection, and she held his gaze because she had decided months ago that the last thing she would ever let him see was her looking away first. This isn't finished, Victor said. I know, Caleb said. I expect you'll be back. Count on it. He turned and mounted his horse in one smooth motion and rode back down the lane without hurrying, Cord and the other man behind him, and Clara watched them go until the lane was empty and then went on watching the empty lane for another full minute because she had learned not to trust an absence until she was sure of it. Caleb came inside. He leaned the rifle against the wall and sat down at the table and put his hands flat on the surface, and Clara noticed that they were not entirely steady. She noticed it and did not say anything about it, because a man who had just done what Caleb had done was entitled to a few seconds of reaction, and calling attention to it would diminish something that shouldn't be diminished. She put coffee on. He'll use the law, she said, her back to him. I know. He knows the county sheriff in Harlan. Probably has someone here too. Probably. He was quiet for a moment. Does he actually have legal standing to compel you to go back? Clara set the pot on the stove. A wife belongs to her husband under the law as it's currently written in this state. He can make a case for it if he finds a judge who'll hear it. She turned around. He'll find one. Caleb looked at the table. His hands had steadied. How long would that take? Days? Maybe a week if we're lucky. He'll want to move fast because every day that goes by is a day that more people know and the story gets harder to control. She sat across from him. Victor is very careful about his story. Then we need to be faster, Caleb said. With what? He looked up at her. You said he makes people feel like they owe him, that his generosity is a kind of control. He turned his coffee cup. What happens to those people if it comes out that he's not what he says he is? Clara looked at him. Some of them would be relieved. Some of them have known for a long time and been waiting for someone else to say it first. She paused. But nobody's going to say it. Not against Victor Hale's money and influence. Louise Alderman said she wasn't the only one. Louise Alderman said that from the safety of her wagon on a public road. That's different from saying it in a room where Victor can hear her. Caleb was quiet for a moment, thinking. She could see him doing it, that methodical quality he had, that habit of working through a thing from all sides before he committed to a direction. What's he most afraid of? Caleb said. She didn't have to think about it. Documentation. Witnesses who won't be bought. She looked at her hands. He spent years building a version of himself that people believe in. If that version gets contradicted by something he can't dismiss, something in writing, something public, he loses the one thing he actually needs, which is the benefit of the doubt. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. "The scars on your arms," he said carefully. She tensed, just slightly. "Yes. A doctor could document those." She was quiet. "Not the county doctor," she said. "He's Victor's. There's a doctor in Millhaven, Thomas Greer. He's retired mostly. Worked in a city hospital before he came out here." Caleb looked at her steadily. "He's not anybody's doctor. He doesn't owe Victor Hale anything." Clara sat with that for a moment. The idea of it, of showing someone, officially, the record of what Victor had done to her, was something she had both wanted and been terrified of for a very long time. Wanting it felt dangerous. Evidence that could be used could also be contested, denied, turned against her by a man with enough money to pay for a convincing counter-argument. "He'll say I did it to myself," she said. "Let him say it. He'll say I'm unstable. He's been laying the groundwork for that story for years. Every time he hurt me, he told people afterward that I was fragile, that I was having a hard time, that he was worried about me." Her voice was level. She had told this story to herself so many times that she could deliver it without breaking. "He's very good at building the story before the story needs to be told." "Then we build a different one," Caleb said. "And we build it first." She stared at him. "You, me, May, Louise Alderman," he said. "That's 4 people who know what's actually happening. There may be others. Victor's man Dyers has worked for him for 12 years. A man works for someone that long, he's seen things. He may not be willing to say so, but he's seen them." He looked at her. "You said he makes people feel like they owe him. Those are also people who might be relieved to have the debt called even. If we can give them a way to say something without it costing them everything." "You're talking about building a case," Clara said. "I'm talking about giving the truth somewhere to stand." She looked at him across the kitchen table. This man she had known for 4 days. This man who had given her a room with a key and made oatmeal and stood in his yard with a rifle against 3 men and not once asked her to be grateful for any of it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. It was the same question she had asked before, and she knew it, but the answer he had given before, "I had a family once," felt insufficient now. Insufficient for this, for what he was putting himself in the path of. He looked at her steadily. "Because it's right," he said, "and because I've spent 6 years doing nothing, and I'm not sure I can look at myself for another 6. The coffee had come to boil. Clara got up and poured it. They went to see Thomas Greer that afternoon. He was a small man, 70 if he was a day, with the precise hands of someone who had spent a lifetime using them carefully, and the kind of face that had settled into a permanent expression of unsurprised attention. He had a house at the edge of Millhaven with a small room off the parlor that still had a medical table in it from the years when he had practiced more actively, without interrupting, and then he looked at Clara. "You want me to document what I find," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "And you understand that documentation can be used in legal proceedings, by both sides." "I understand." He nodded once, and then he was a doctor, simply and entirely, with all the personal questions gone from his face. He asked her to remove her coat and her outer dress, and Caleb waited in the parlor, and Thomas Greer looked at what 6 years of Victor Hale had left behind, and he wrote it down with the same careful precision he had brought to everything else, in a handwriting that was small and exact and absolutely legible. When she came back to the parlor, Caleb was standing at the window. He turned when she came in, and she could see from his face that he had been doing the things she had seen him do before, that internal work of carrying something without showing it. "All right?" he said. "Yes." Greer came in behind her. I was carrying 2 sheets of paper, and he handed one to Clara and one to Caleb. "I've made copies," he said. "Keep yours separately. Do not store them in the same place." He looked at Clara with those unsurprised eyes. "The injuries are consistent with what you've described. I've noted that in the documentation. I've also noted the approximate dates, based on the stage of healing, and there is a range of injuries here that spans several years." He paused. "It will be difficult for anyone to argue self-infliction given the location and nature of some of them." Clara held the paper and did not look at it. "Thank you," she said. "If you need me to testify," Greer said, "I will. I want you to know that." She looked at him. He was watching her with the matter-of-fact steadiness of a man who had seen enough of the world's damage to have stopped being shocked by it, and was now, in his retirement and his old age, interested primarily in doing something about it. "I may take you up on that," she said. He nodded. "See that you do." Word reached them before they got back to the ranch. A boy on a horse flagged them down on the road out of Mill Haven, one of May Sutton's grandsons, 12 years old, who delivered the message with the breathless efficiency of a child who understood that the message was important without fully understanding why. "My grandmother says to tell you Victor Hale's been to see the sheriff," the boy said. "He's filed a complaint, something about a wife who left against medical advice." Clara felt the ground shift under her in that metaphorical way it did when things accelerated past the pace she had planned for. Caleb said, "Thank your grandmother," and the boy rode back the way he had come. "Medical advice," Clara said. "He's using the story he built," Caleb said. "He'll say I'm unwell, that I left in a confused state and put the baby at risk." She could hear already the precise and reasonable way Victor would tell it: the worried husband, the fragile wife, the responsible man trying to protect his family. "The sheriff will send someone. Then we get there first." He turned the wagon. "Caleb, the sheriff in Mill Haven is not the sheriff in Harlan County," Caleb said, "and he's not in Victor Hale's pocket. Not yet." It was not a plan. It was barely a direction, but it was what there was, and Clara had learned by now that sometimes what there was had to be enough. The Mill Haven sheriff was a man named Abel Cross, and he was 38 years old and had been in the job for 4 years, and had the look of someone who had taken it because he believed in the idea of it and was currently engaged in the ongoing project of discovering how far reality diverged from the idea. He was sitting at his desk when they came in, and he looked at Caleb with the expression of a man who was not surprised to see him, but had hoped for a little more time. "I had a feeling," Cross said. "You've spoken to Hale," Caleb said. "I've received a complaint, yes." Cross looked at Clara. "Mrs. Hale." "My name is Clara Voss," she said. "My name before my marriage." Cross looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the paper on his desk. "The complaint says you left your home in a disturbed mental state following a difficult childbirth, and that your husband is concerned for your welfare and the welfare of the infant." "The complaint is false," Clara said. "That's what complaints generally are, according to the people they're about." He said it without cruelty, just wearily. "What I have in front of me is a husband's account and a missing wife. What I don't have is—" Clara put Greer's paper on his desk. Cross looked at it. He picked it up. He read it in the particular way that people read things they weren't expecting to have to read, slowly, going back over certain sections. When he set it down, his face had changed. "Thomas Greer signed this," he said. "He did. Tom Greer hasn't signed anything official in 5 years. He signed this." Cross looked at her, really looked at her, the way he maybe hadn't when she first walked in. And she looked back at him and let him see what was there, all of it, the exhaustion and the steadiness, and the particular quality that women who have survived a long time in difficult circumstances have, that quality of being both more fragile and more durable than they appear. "What do you need from me?" he said. "Time," Clara said, "and someone to make sure that when Victor Hale comes back to this county, he comes through proper channels." "He'll get a lawyer," Cross said, "if he hasn't already." "I know. So will I." She paused. "Are there women in this town who've had dealings with Victor Hale? I don't mean business dealings." Cross was quiet for a moment. "That's not something I could tell you officially," he said, "but unofficially." He looked at the window. "May Sutton would know who to talk to better than I would." He looked back at her. "What you're trying to do, building a record, it's the right idea, but it's slow, and he's going to move fast." "Then I'll move faster." He looked at her for another moment, and then he looked at Caleb, and something passed between them, the kind of look that men who respect each other exchange when they have decided to be on the same side of something. "I'll hold off responding to the complaint for 24 hours, Cross said. "I've got grounds. The documentation creates a question I'm obligated to investigate before I act on a civil complaint. That buys you a day." He held up a hand. "1 day. After that, I'm bound by what the law says, and the law on a husband's rights is not—" "I know what the law says," Clara said. "Then use the day." They used it. May Sutton opened her door that evening to find Caleb and Clara on her porch, and before they had said anything, she said, "Come in, I've been expecting you," and led them to her kitchen where there were already 3 other women sitting at the table. Clara didn't know them. May introduced them briefly. A woman named Helen, who ran the boarding house. A woman named Frances, who taught at the school. A woman in her 60s whose name was just Dot, and who looked like she had been waiting for this particular evening for a very long time. "Tell us what you need," May said. Clara sat down at the table with Rose in her arms, and she looked at these 4 women. These women she had not known existed 6 days ago when she had been shivering in a stranger's barn, and she felt something complicated and large move through her chest. She told them. She told them everything this time, not the edited version, not the survival version, but the real one, with all its ugly specifics. And the women at the table listened in the way women listen when they recognize a story because they have seen its shape before, in their own lives or in the lives of someone they loved. Dot, the oldest one, said, "Margaret Hale, his first wife." Everyone looked at her. "He was married before," Dot said. 20 years ago, before he came to Harlan County. Woman named Margaret. She died." She looked at Clara. "At the time it was an accident. She fell." The kitchen was very quiet. "Can you prove that?" Caleb said. "No," Dot said. "I knew her sister is all. The sister didn't think it was an accident, but she had no money and no standing, and she went to 3 different people who all told her to go home and be grateful she wasn't married to him herself." She looked at Clara. "The sister died 2 years ago, but I was there for those conversations. I remember what was said." Clara held Rose and felt the cold clarity of it settle over her. Victor had done this before. She had suspected it, the way you suspect a thing you don't want to fully know. And having it confirmed was not a surprise, but it was a weight. "That's a piece," Caleb said. "Not proof, but a piece." "There are other pieces," Helen said. She had a careful voice, the voice of a woman who chose her words with precision. "Things I've heard from women who stayed at the boarding house, women passing through." She paused. "Victor Hale's name has come up before, not in ways that could ever be formally used, but in ways that I remember." Clara looked around the table. This was not the army she needed. This was 4 women in a kitchen in a small town in the middle of the frontier with a day's worth of borrowed time and a man with money and lawyers coming at them with everything the law currently allowed him. But it was something. It was more than nothing. It was more than she had been carrying alone for 3 years. "I need to tell my story publicly," Clara said, "before he tells his. If I can get in front of enough people in this town, the kind of people who talk, who set the tone, and if I can do it with documentation and witnesses and Thomas Greer's signature on a piece of paper." "The Millhaven Social is on Saturday," Frances said. "Town Hall. Half the county comes." "That's 4 days," Caleb said. "It's enough," Clara said. Caleb looked at her across the table. She could see him calculating the risks, running through the ways it could go wrong, the same thing she was doing. "Victor will know what you're planning before Saturday," he said. "Yes, he'll try to stop it. He'll try." She looked at Rose. The baby was awake, watching the lamplight with that unfocused infant attention, utterly unaware of the machinery being assembled around her life. But he's used to dealing with people alone, one person at a time. That's how he works. He isolates, and then he manages. She looked up. He doesn't know how to manage a room full of people who have already decided what they think. May Sutton looked at her with something that might, in different light, have been called approval. "Saturday, then?" May said. Outside, the wind was picking up again, coming out of the north, carrying the particular smell of incoming weather. Clara heard it and did not feel afraid of it this time. She had already been through the worst storm this country had to offer, and she had come out the other side. She looked at Caleb. He was watching her with those dark, steady eyes, and in them she saw something she had not been looking for and did not know what to do with yet. Not pity, not obligation, but something that had been growing quietly in the space between them over 4 days of proximity and honesty and shared difficulty, something neither of them had named and neither of them was quite ready to name. She looked away first this time, but not because she was afraid. The 4 days before Saturday moved the way time moves when something is coming that cannot be stopped. Not slowly, not quickly, but with that particular quality of inevitability that makes every hour feel both too short and too long at once. Caleb drove Clara back to the ranch that night from May's kitchen with the wind picking up behind them and neither of them talking much. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who had been through enough together in a short time that they had stopped needing to fill the space between them with noise. Clara held Rose and watched the dark road and thought about Saturday, about what she was going to say and how she was going to say it, about Victor's face when he realized what she had done. Caleb drove and watched the road and thought about whatever Caleb thought about, which she was learning he kept mostly to himself unless there was a practical reason to share it. When they got inside, he put more wood in the stove and she fed Rose, and they sat at the kitchen table for a while in the late evening quiet, and Clara said, "He'll find out before Saturday about the meeting." "Yes. He'll try to get ahead of it somehow." "That's what I'd do," Caleb said. He turned his coffee cup. "He'll go to the men first. The mill owner, the land office, whoever on the county commission owes him something. Try to build a wall of credibility before you can knock it down. And if he succeeds? Then Saturday becomes harder, not impossible, just harder." She looked at him. "You've been thinking about this." "Been doing little else." He looked at her across the rim of his cup. "There's something else we should do before Saturday. Something I should have thought of sooner." "What?" "Talk to Dyers." She stared at him. "Victor's man." "Victor's man for 12 years, Caleb said, "which means he's also the man who's been there for 12 years of Victor being Victor. And I've been thinking about what you said, about how Victor makes people feel like they owe him. Dyers has been in his employ long enough to either believe in him completely or to have seen enough that the belief ran out a long time ago, and he's just been staying out of habit, and because he doesn't know what else to do." Clara was quiet for a moment. "If it's the first," she said, "you tip our hand and Dyers reports everything back. If it's the second, we get someone who's seen things from the inside. How do you tell which it is before you've committed to the conversation?" Caleb set his coffee cup down. "You don't," he said. "You make a judgment, and you go with it." Clara looked at the table. She thought about Dyers, the heavy-set man who had ridden up the lane 2 days ago, who had delivered Victor's message and ridden away again when Caleb didn't cooperate. She thought about the way Dyers had looked at her, in the fraction of a second before he looked away. She had seen something in that look. She had spent 3 years learning to read what was behind people's expressions, to notice the thing that happened in the half-second before a person got control of their face. What she had seen in Dyers' look was not loyalty. "He lives in Harlan County," she said, "near the east edge." "I know where he lives," Caleb said. "I'll go tomorrow." "He might not talk to you." "He might not." Caleb picked up his cup again. "But I've got nothing to lose by asking and potentially something to gain. That's usually good enough math for me." Clara looked at him. This man who kept doing the math of other people's problems as if they were his own, who had upended his 6 years of careful solitude for a woman he'd found in his barn without once suggesting that this was something she should feel indebted for. She wanted to say something about it and could not find the right words, which was unusual for her, because she had always been better with words than most people in her life had wanted her to be. "Get some sleep," Caleb said, and stood up to put more wood in the stove for the night. I was gone before she woke up the next morning. She found a note on the table, written in the plain, careful handwriting of a man who had learned to write functionally rather than beautifully. "Gone to Harlan County. Back by afternoon. Stoves loaded. Don't open the door to anyone." Below that, almost as an afterthought, "May knows you're here if you need something." Clara stood in the kitchen holding the note for a moment, and then she folded it and put it in her coat pocket for no reason she could have named, and she went about the business of the morning. The ranch was different when she was alone in it. Not frightening. She had stopped being frightened of empty spaces years ago because empty spaces were what she had learned to navigate, and the alternative had been so much worse than emptiness. But she noticed things she hadn't noticed with Caleb present. The way the morning light came through the east window and moved across the kitchen floor. The sound the stove made when the wood settled. The photograph on the mantel that she could see from the kitchen doorway. Eleanor and James, the boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's chin. The two of them caught in that frozen moment of being alive. She went to look at it properly for the first time. Eleanor had been a handsome woman, not delicate, strong-featured, the kind of face that looked like it could hold up under difficulty. James had been round-cheeked and serious-looking for a child, with the expression of a boy who was paying close attention to something just outside the frame of the photograph. Clara looked at the photograph for a long time and thought about the closed door down the hall. And Caleb standing in front of it that evening, she had seen him, and she understood something she hadn't quite articulated to herself before, which was that grief was not only about the person you had lost, but about the future you had been building with them. And when the person went, the future went with them. And some people could build a new one, and some people just kept standing at the edge of the one that was gone, looking in. She wondered which kind Caleb was. She thought he might not know yet himself. Rose was awake in the back room, making the small intermittent sounds of a baby who is not yet genuinely unhappy but is beginning to consider it, and Clara went to her and picked her up and held her against her chest and stood at the window of the back room looking out at the frost-covered yard and the bare cottonwood tree and the empty lane. "We're going to be all right," she told Rose. She said it the way she had said things to Rose since the beginning, not because she was certain of it, but because she had decided to treat it as true until it wasn't, and in her experience, that decision was the closest thing to courage that most people ever actually managed. What? Caleb came back at 2 in the afternoon with mud on his boots and the expression of a man who had learned something he wasn't sure how to feel about. He came in, took off his coat and his boots at the door, and sat down at the table, and Clara put coffee in front of him without asking and sat across from him and waited. "Dyers talked," he said. She let out a breath. "Not immediately. He opened the door and looked at me like I was something he'd been dreading, and then tried to close it again. And I told him I had information about what Victor Hale was doing and that it was going to come out on Saturday in front of the whole county one way or another, and he could either be on the right side of it or the wrong one." Caleb looked at his coffee. "He let me in." "What did he say?" "He said he's been working for Victor since Victor was 32 years old. Said he took the job because the money was good and he needed the money, and by the time he understood what Victor was, he'd been there long enough that leaving felt like it would catch up with him somehow, like Victor would make sure of it." He paused. "He's afraid of him. Has been for years." Clara nodded slowly. "What did he see?" "Enough." Caleb looked at her. "He saw what Victor did to you." "Not all of it. Victor was careful, like you said, careful about what he did in front of people. But there were times when he wasn't careful enough, and Dyers saw, and he told himself the story that people tell themselves when they're not ready to act on what they know." She looked at the table. She thought about all the times she had caught something shift in Dyer's face over the years, some flicker of something that she had told herself was irrelevant, because irrelevant was safer. "Will he testify?" she said. "He won't go to court. He's got a family, and he's not ready to take that risk, and I'm not going to pretend he should be." Caleb turned his cup. "But he's willing to put something in writing, a statement. What he saw, when, specific occasions, signed. Victor will know immediately. Dyers doesn't care anymore," Caleb said. "Or he cares, but he cares about this more. He said—" He stopped. He looked at the window for a moment. "He said he's got a daughter himself. She's 11. He said he keeps thinking about what he's teaching her, staying where he is." Clara was quiet for a long time. "He mentioned Margaret," Caleb said. She looked up. "Victor's first wife. He wasn't there for it. He started working for Victor 3 years after Margaret died. But Victor talked about her, in ways that Dyers said didn't sit right, talked about how fragile she had been, how troubled, how he had done everything he could." He looked at Clara. "The same story he's building about you." She felt it then, the full cold weight of what she had almost become, what she had been on the trajectory toward, the particular fate that Victor had already rehearsed once. She had known it, in the way you know things you're not ready to fully face, but hearing it laid out that plainly, with the evidence of a pattern extending back 20 years before she had ever been part of it, made it real in a different way than it had been before. "He was going to kill me," she said. Not a question. Caleb met her eyes. "I think that was the direction it was heading, yes." She sat with that for a moment. Outside, a cloud moved over the sun and the kitchen went dim and then bright again. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday," he agreed. The next 2 days had their own texture. Victor did what Caleb had predicted. He moved through the county's men of standing like a man tending a garden, calling in favors, shoring up alliances, making sure that the people who mattered understood his version of events before any other version could take root. Clara heard about it in pieces, through May and through Louise Alderman, who had quietly become a source of information that Clara had not expected and was grateful for. "He went to my husband," Louise told her on Thursday, when she came to the ranch on the pretext of returning a borrowed pot that May had given her specifically for the purpose. Told him the whole story, his version, spent 2 hours. She set the pot on the table and did not move toward the door. My husband came home and told me Victor was a good man caught in a difficult situation with an unstable wife. What did you say? Clara asked. I said I wasn't sure I agreed. Louise looked at her with that careful, composed expression that Clara had come to understand was what Louise Alderman looked like when she had made a decision she hadn't fully made public yet. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We've disagreed before. We'll disagree again. A pause. He won't stop me from coming Saturday. Clara looked at her. You're going to speak? I'm going to be in the room, Louise said. What I say will depend on what needs saying. It wasn't a commitment to anything specific. Clara accepted it for what it was. A woman who was moving as far out on the ice as she could calculate the ice would hold, which was further than she'd gone yesterday and might be further tomorrow. Frances, the schoolteacher, came by on Friday morning. She had a document with her, a written account of 2 women she taught alongside in Harlan County who had independently, over the past 2 years, mentioned things about Victor Hale that they had never formalized into a complaint. She had written down what they'd told her, with dates, and she'd had both women sign it, and she put it on Clara's kitchen table with the slightly surprised expression of someone who had gone out expecting to do a small thing and discovered they had done a larger one. They were willing? Clara said. One of them wanted to. The other one took some time. Frances sat down. She was afraid of what Victor would do when he found out. I told her that the point of doing it together with more than one person was that there was less for him to do to any one person individually. She looked at Clara. I don't know if that's true, but I believed it when I said it. It's true enough, Clara said. Dyer's written statement arrived by way of a boy she didn't know, delivered to Caleb's door on Friday afternoon in a plain envelope with no name on it. Caleb read it and handed it to Clara without comment. It was 4 pages in a cramped, careful hand, and it documented 6 specific incidents spanning 5 years, with dates and descriptions that were precise and entirely recognizable. And at the bottom it was signed Henry J. Dyers, in the signature of a man who had thought about it for a long time before picking up the pen. Clara read it twice and handed it back. That's real, she said. Yes, Caleb said. That's the kind of thing that's hard to dismiss. It is. She looked at the envelope. He's going to lose everything because of this. Victor? Dyers. She looked up. If this comes out, Victor will make sure Dyers is finished in this county. Finished everywhere he has influence. I know, Dyers knows. She was quiet. She was thinking about the cost of other people's courage, about what it meant to ask someone to take a risk for your survival, about whether the fact that they were willing made the asking right. Tell him thank you, she said. When you see him. I will. Saturday came. The Millhaven Town Hall was a wooden building that served as everything the community needed it to be. Meeting place, venue for dances, polling station, the building that people gathered in when something happened that required gathering. By 6 in the evening it was full, which was not unusual for a county social, but the particular quality of the fullness was unusual, the way the conversations were pitched slightly lower than normal, the way people were watching the door. Clara arrived with Caleb, May, and Frances. She was wearing the best dress she had, which was not the best dress she had owned a month ago, but was clean and pressed and sufficient. And she had Rose in her arms and Greer's documentation and Dyer's statement and Frances's document in a leather satchel that Caleb carried. She had not been afraid in the wagon. She had been aware of the moment, of the weight of it, of everything that was going to happen in the next few hours. But fear was not the right word for what she was feeling. Fear implied that she hadn't already been through the worst of it, and she had. And whatever this room held for her, it did not hold the particular darkness of 3 years in Victor Hale's house. Victor was already there. He was standing near the front of the room with the mill owner and 2 other men Clara recognized as county commissioners, and he saw her come in across the length of the room, and nothing in his expression changed. He just watched her, that calm, calculating watch, and she felt it on her like weather and kept walking. Caleb stayed close, not touching, not in any way that would give Victor something to use, just present, the way a man stands near something he intends to protect. May went to talk to people. She was good at that, May. She moved through a room like someone who belonged everywhere in it, which she did, because she had lived in this county for 40 years and knew everyone and was known and had spent that social capital carefully. Clara watched her work and understood that May had been doing this her whole life, this particular kind of community maintenance, and that it was its own form of power even if the law didn't recognize it as such. The social proceeded the way socials proceeded: food on the long tables, people finding each other, the ordinary business of a community gathering. And for 30 minutes or so, it looked like maybe the ordinary business was going to win, like the evening was going to proceed without the thing everyone was waiting for. Then Victor walked toward Clara. Caleb saw him coming and didn't move, just tracked him with his eyes. Clara saw him too and stayed where she was, Rose in her arms, and waited. Victor stopped 6 feet away. He looked at Rose first, then at Clara, with the expression of a man who has decided that this situation calls for a public performance of reasonableness. "Clara," he said, "I'd like to speak with you, privately." "There's nothing private to discuss," she said. The people nearby had gone quiet. Conversations were ending in a ripple outward from where they were standing. "This isn't the place," Victor said. "I think it is," she said. He looked at her and she could see very briefly the thing she had always been able to see behind his composed face when he was around her, the thing nobody else had position to see. The cold calculation, the management, the absolute refusal to be caught at a disadvantage. "You're going to embarrass yourself," he said, still quiet, still pleasant. "I'm going to tell the truth," she said. His jaw tightened. Not much. Just enough that she saw it, and May saw it from 10 feet away. And Louise Alderman, who had been standing near the refreshment table, saw it from 15. "She left voluntarily," Victor said, and his voice had risen just enough to be heard by the people around them. "She's been unwell. I've been trying to bring her home safely. I don't know what she's told people here, but I'm asking that you all understand that she's been through a difficult time and that she needs care. Not—" "I have documentation," Clara said. The room had gone very quiet. "From a physician," she said, "documenting injuries consistent with repeated harm sustained over a period of years, signed by Dr. Thomas Greer." Victor looked at her. His face was doing what it always did. Nothing, revealing nothing. But his stillness had a different quality now, a quality of something held very rigid that would rather be moving. "I also have a statement from Henry Dyers," she said. Something moved through the room. She could feel it, that particular current that moves through a crowd when they hear a name they know in a context they didn't expect. "I'm not making accusations," she said. She turned her head slightly to address the room, not Victor, because the room was who mattered now. The room was the entity she was trying to reach. "I'm telling you what happened to me in my marriage. I'm telling you because I had a daughter 6 weeks ago, and I made a decision that I would not let her grow up watching what I went through, and because I was afraid to do this alone. And because I found people in this town, people I had never met before a week ago, who were willing to stand beside me and say that the truth matters more than a comfortable story." She paused. Rose had her fist curled against Clara's collarbone and was looking at the ceiling with her usual absolute attention. "Victor Hale is a man with money and influence and a reputation he's spent years building," Clara said. "He's also a man who hurt me in the dark and then told people I was fragile in the light. He's done it before. Margaret Hale died in circumstances that her sister did not believe were accidental, and the sister was not heard." She looked at Victor. "I intend to be heard." The silence was complete. Victor said, "This is defamation." "It's testimony," Caleb said, from where he was standing. He was not loud about it. He just set it into the silence and let it sit there. Victor looked at him. That look had something in it that Clara had not seen before, some crack in the composure. Not rage, not yet, but the thing that preceded rage in a man who had kept it contained for a very long time. "You have no standing in this," Victor said to Caleb. "She's in my house," Caleb said. "That's enough standing for me." "She's in your house." Victor let the phrase sit in the air for a moment, with a particular emphasis that was an insinuation without being a statement. "I'm sure the people in this room can draw their own conclusions about that arrangement." The silence shifted. And then Louise Alderman said, from the refreshment table, clearly and without any particular drama, "My husband and I have known Victor Hale for 7 years. He has eaten at our table. And I will tell you that I have never, in 7 years, been comfortable watching him look at the women in a room. I didn't say so because I had no evidence. I'm saying so now because I do. She said it the way she said everything, with the measured authority of a woman who was accustomed to being heard and knew exactly what she was spending when she spent it. The room took it in. One of the county commissioners, a man named Harold Briggs, who had been standing near Victor, took a small step sideways. It was barely perceptible, but Clara saw it. May saw it. Victor saw it. Frances stepped forward. She laid the statement on the table nearest to her, the signed accounts of the two women from Harlan County, and said, "I have two more accounts, if anyone wants to read them." People moved toward the table. Victor said, "This is a coordinated attack." "Nobody coordinated anything," May said, and her voice was the voice of a woman who had stood up at public meetings for 40 years and knew how to make herself heard in a large room. "These people are just saying what they know. You can call it coordinated if that makes it easier, but that's a word you're choosing, not the truth." Victor looked around the room. Clara watched him do it, watched him take inventory of the faces, the body language, the small shifts of position that told him what he needed to know about where the room was going. She had seen him do this in smaller rooms with smaller stakes, and she knew what it meant when she saw his shoulders settle in a way that was not relaxation but recalculation. I was deciding how much he had lost and what was worth saving. "I want my daughter," he said. He looked at Clara, and for the first time in 3 years she saw something in his face that was not performance. It was something raw and specific, and it frightened her more than his composure ever had. "Rose is my child. Whatever you say about me, she is legally my child, and you cannot simply— Any action regarding the child needs to go through the courts," Abel Cross said. Clara turned. The sheriff had come in sometime in the last few minutes, and she hadn't seen him. He was standing near the door with his hat in his hands and the expression of a man who had thought carefully about where to stand and had chosen. "That means proper legal proceedings," Cross said, "with evidence on both sides presented to a judge. Not this." He looked at Victor. "And given that there is now a physician's documentation in evidence and a signed witness statement, any judge who hears this case is going to be looking at a different picture than the one you filed a complaint about." Victor looked at Cross. He looked at the room. He looked at Clara. She held his gaze and held Rose and stood still in the middle of the room that had turned. And she did not feel triumph, because triumph was not what this was. What this was survival. What this was the truth finally occupying the same space as the people who needed to know it. "This isn't over," Victor said. "No," Clara said. "It's not. But the part where nobody knows is over." He left. He walked out of the town hall with his back straight and his chin level and the dignity of a man who had decided that retreat was not the same as defeat, and Clara watched him go and felt the room breathe around her. Caleb was at her side. "You all right?" he said, low enough that only she could hear. She considered the question honestly, the way she had learned to consider things. Her hands were not entirely steady. Rose was making the small sound that meant hunger was becoming a real concern. Her heart was doing something complicated in her chest that she did not have a clean name for. "Not yet," she said, "but I'm going to be." He nodded. He did not say anything reassuring about it, and she was glad because reassurance would have been the wrong register. What she needed and what she had was someone standing next to her in the aftermath, which was a different thing, and a more difficult thing, and in some ways a more important thing than anything that had come before. May came over and squeezed her arm. Frances touched her shoulder. Louise Alderman crossed the room and said nothing, just looked at Clara with those composed eyes and nodded once, the nod of one woman to another who has done something that cost something. The room around them slowly started moving again. People talking in low voices, people looking at the documents on the table, people doing the quiet work of revising the story they had been living with. Clara looked down at Rose, who had moved from making sounds about hunger to beginning the serious work of crying about it, and she laughed, which surprised her, which surprised Caleb, who looked at her with an expression that she had not seen on his face before. "She's hungry," Clara said. "Consistently," he said. "She has her priorities." He smiled. It was a small thing, that smile. Not much to look at, nothing polished about it, but it was real, and she had learned in the past week to value real things over polished ones with a thoroughness that she suspected would last the rest of her life. "Let's go home," Caleb said. She looked at him. The word had landed differently than she thought he intended it to, or perhaps exactly as he intended it to. She wasn't sure, and he looked slightly uncertain in the way that a man looks when he said something that revealed more than he planned. "Yes," she said, and did not make it complicated because some things didn't need to be complicated. "Let's go home." Victor did not disappear quietly. Clara had not expected him to. A man who had spent 20 years building a version of himself that the world believed in does not walk out of a town hall on a Saturday night and decide that the version is finished. He had too much invested in it, too much of his own sense of himself tied up in the story, and the story had just been publicly contradicted in front of half the county by a woman he had spent 3 years convincing himself he owned. The lawyer arrived in Mill Haven on Monday. His name was Carver, and he came from the city with a leather case and the manner of someone accustomed to making provincial problems go away through the application of sufficient legal pressure. He filed papers with the county court seeking formal custody of Rose on the grounds that Clara was mentally unstable, had abandoned the marital home, and had placed an infant in danger by traveling in severe winter conditions without adequate provision. Abel Cross sent word to Caleb the same afternoon the papers were filed. Caleb read the message at the kitchen table and handed it to Clara without comment. She read it twice. Then she folded it and set it down and looked at the window for a long moment. "He's making the case about Rose," she said. "Yes. Not about me. About her." She turned the paper over in her hands. "If he can make the case that I'm an unfit mother, that I put her in danger, then even with Greer's documentation, even with Dyer's statement, he reframes the whole thing. He's not the husband who hurt me anymore. He's the father trying to protect his child from a woman who rode through a blizzard with a newborn." Caleb looked at her. "That's a version of events." "It's not entirely wrong," she said. "I did ride through a blizzard with a newborn." "You rode through a blizzard to get her away from him." A judge who's inclined to believe Victor's money over my testimony might not find that distinction as clear as we do. She set the paper on the table. Her voice was steady. She had gotten very good at keeping her voice steady, while her internal landscape did other things entirely. "I need a lawyer." "I know. A real one. Not someone local who owes favors to the wrong people." "I've been thinking about that since Saturday," Caleb said. He stood up and went to the window. "There's a man in the city. Name is Whitfield. He does civil cases, women's issues specifically. May knows him. She helped a woman 3 years ago get out of a situation not entirely unlike yours, and Whitfield was the lawyer." He turned around. "He's not cheap." "How not cheap?" Caleb looked at her steadily. "I've got savings. From the ranch. 6 years of living alone and not spending much." She stared at him. "No," she said. "Clara, Caleb, I am not taking your savings." "You're not taking them. I'm offering them." He crossed his arms. "There's a difference. The difference matters less than you think when I have no way to repay you. I'm not asking for repayment." She pushed back from the table and stood up, because sitting felt wrong for this conversation, felt too passive. "You've already given me a week of your life and your home, and put yourself in front of Victor Hale twice, and helped build a case that cost you your privacy in this county. You don't get to also give me your savings." "Why not?" "Because—" She stopped. She pressed her hand against the back of the chair and looked at him, and the truth of it was that she didn't have a clean argument against it. The argument she had was emotional, was about the already uncomfortable weight of what she owed this man, was about the fact that accepting this felt like crossing a line from one category of thing into another category that she wasn't sure she was ready for. "You're afraid," Caleb said. He said it without accusation, just observation. "I'm practical," she said. "You're both." He uncrossed his arms. "Clara, the man is going to try to take your daughter. I have money that can help stop that. The reason you don't want me to spend it has nothing to do with the money." She looked at him. He was right. She knew he was right. She had spent 3 years in a situation where every kindness came attached to a cost she discovered later, where generosity was a form of control, where the ledger was always being kept and you never got to see the balance until it was called. She had learned, down to her bones, to be suspicious of what people offered without visible price tags. And Caleb Whitmore kept offering things without visible price tags. And the thing she was most afraid of was that she was going to let herself believe in that and then discover, at some later point when it was too late to protect herself, that the price tag had been there the whole time and she had just been too desperate to see it. There's no cost, he said, as if he could see exactly what she was thinking. I want to be clear about that. There is no cost. You don't owe me anything, and you won't owe me anything after this. If you take your daughter and go to your sister's and I never see you again, that's all right. The money is just money. She looked at him for a long time. Rose made a sound from the back room. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then Clara said, "Contact Whitfield." Whitfield arrived on Wednesday, a small spare man in his 50s with spectacles and the patient, precise manner of someone who had spent decades listening to people describe the worst things that had happened to them and had learned to receive that information without making it about himself. He sat at Caleb's kitchen table and read every document Clara had and asked questions that were specific and practical and occasionally uncomfortable. And he wrote things down in a small notebook and did not offer reassurance until she asked directly. "What are our chances?" she said. He looked at what he'd written. "Better than they would have been a week ago," he said. "The public testimony changes things. It's not legally binding, but it creates a context. Judges are human. They read the paper. They hear what people in a county are saying. Victor Hale walked into that town hall as a concerned husband and walked out as something else, and that something else is going to follow him into a courtroom. That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "The honest answer is that custody law in this state still leans toward the father in most circumstances. And a man with Victor Hale's resources can sustain a legal fight longer than most people can. What we have going for us is the documentation, the witness statements, and the fact that he waited this long to file. A genuinely concerned father would have moved faster." He looked at her over his spectacles. "Also, Margaret." Clara stilled. "You know about Margaret." "May told me." He folded his hands on the table. "I've already sent someone to look into the circumstances of her death. If there's anything there that can be formally established, even a pattern, even a question that a judge feels needs answering, it changes the character of the case." He paused. "It may take time." "How much time?" "The initial hearing is in 3 weeks. That's the custody question. Temporary custody while the full case is heard. If I can get the judge to grant you temporary custody, you stay at an advantage. If Victor gets it..." He stopped. "If Victor gets it," Claire said, "I lose access to my daughter until the full case is decided, which could be months." "Yes." She looked at the table. 3 weeks. It was both an eternity and not enough time. "What do I need to do?" she said. "Be exactly what you are," Whitfield said, "which is a woman who got her daughter out of a dangerous situation and asked a community for help and got it. Don't embellish. Don't perform. Judges can smell performance." He looked at her steadily. "The truth is enough. You just have to let it be." The 3 weeks were difficult in the way that waiting is always difficult. Not the acute difficulty of crisis, but the grinding difficulty of sustained uncertainty, of days that passed too slowly and too quickly at the same time, of small routines that continued regardless of what was at stake. Clara stayed at Caleb's ranch. There was a conversation about this that was brief and practical. She had nowhere else to go that was both safe and close enough to Millhaven for the legal proceedings. Ruth was a 4-day ride away, and Caleb's house was, by now, a known quantity. But underneath the practical conversation was the other thing, the thing that had been building since the night in the barn. And neither of them said anything about the other thing because there were too many more urgent things to deal with, and because some things needed more room than 3 weeks of legal crisis could provide. What they did instead was live in the same house, which was its own kind of conversation. He fixed things. That was what Caleb did when he was working something through. He found broken things on the ranch and repaired them, methodically, one thing at a time. The physical work of restoration standing in for whatever internal work was happening that he didn't have words for yet. Clara watched him from the window sometimes, watched him in the yard with tools and wood, and the particular focused patience of a man who believed that broken things could be made to work again if you approached them carefully and didn't force anything. She thought about Eleanor and James. She thought about 6 years of that particular silence she had heard in this house when she first arrived. The silence that was not peaceful, but was the sound of someone having stopped expecting things. She thought about what it cost to expect things again. She knew that cost herself. She was paying it right now, expecting this hearing to go the right way, expecting Whitfield to find what he was looking for in the records surrounding Margaret's death, expecting the truth to be enough. Expecting things was terrifying. She had forgotten how terrifying, in the years when she had trained herself not to. Rose, for her part, had opinions about none of this and continued to grow at the rate that babies grow, which is alarming to anyone paying attention. The way they change not gradually, but in small, sudden jumps, so that one morning you look at them and something is different that wasn't different yesterday. She had begun to smile. Real smiles, not the reflex ones. Actual responses to faces she recognized. And the faces she recognized were Clara's and Caleb's, and when she visited, May's. Caleb's face was the one that made Rose smile the largest. Clara noticed this and did not say anything about it, and tucked it away in the place where she was keeping other things she wasn't ready to examine directly. Whitfield's investigator found something in the city records 11 days before the hearing. It was not proof. Whitfield was careful to say that, careful and precise as he always was, sitting at the kitchen table with a new set of papers in front of him. It was not proof that Victor had caused Margaret's death. What it was a record. A doctor's report from 20 years ago documenting injuries treated 2 months before Margaret died. Injuries described as resulting from a domestic accident, signed by a physician who had since retired but was still alive and, as it turned out, still troubled by certain memories. The retired physician's name was Harmon. He was 74 years old and living in a town 40 miles east, and he had written a letter, unsolicited, in response to a general inquiry Whitfield's investigator had made, stating that he had always believed the injuries he treated on Margaret Hale were not consistent with the domestic accident that had been reported to him, and that he had said nothing because the husband was a man of standing and the woman was dead before anyone asked the right questions. Whitfield put the letter on the table. Clara read it and felt something move through her that was grief and relief simultaneously, which was a combination she had not previously known was possible, but which made a terrible sense when you thought about it. Grief for Margaret, who had not gotten out, and relief so specific and physical that it sat in her chest like pressure releasing. "Will the judge see this?" she said. "The judge will see everything," Whitfield said. "That's my job." The hearing was on a Thursday morning in the county courthouse in Mill Haven, in a room that smelled of wood polish and the particular staleness of official proceedings. Clara sat at a table with Whitfield on one side and Caleb, who had no legal standing in the room but had come anyway and sat in the public gallery with May and Louise Alderman and Francis and Thomas Greer and Abel Cross, and in the back row, Henry Dyers, who had driven 40 miles and sat with his hat in his lap and did not look at anything in particular, on the other side of the low railing. Victor sat at the other table with Carver and 2 other men whose function was unclear to Clara, but whose presence was clearly about volume, about filling the room with the size of his legal resources. The judge was a woman named Hargrove. She was 50-something, with silver hair and reading spectacles, and the expression of someone who had heard every story at least twice before and was not easily moved by the telling of them. Clara had been nervous about this. A judge who was not easily moved was either good or very bad, depending on whether the thing you had was true or just compelling. Carver made his opening argument, which was clean and practiced and built around the image of a concerned father and a troubled mother who had put an infant in genuine physical danger, and Clara sat and listened to it and breathed through it and held on to Whitfield's earlier instruction, "Let the truth be enough." Then Whitfield spoke. He was not dramatic. He did not build to anything or use the language of courtroom performance that Carver had employed. He simply presented, in order, what existed: the documentation from Thomas Greer, the statement from Henry Dyers, the accounts collected by Francis, the letter from Dr. Harmon, and the record of what had happened on Saturday night in the Mill Haven Town Hall. He presented it the way you present evidence, factually, specifically, without embellishment, and let the accumulated weight of it do what accumulated weight does. Judge Hargrove read everything. She read slowly and thoroughly, the way people read things they intend to make decisions about. Carver objected to the Harmon letter as irrelevant. Hargrove overruled him without looking up. Then she looked at Clara. "Mrs. Hale." "Voss," Clara said. "I'd prefer Voss." Hargrove looked at her over her spectacles for a moment. "Ms. Voss, I have one question for you, and I want you to answer it simply." "All right." "When you left your husband's house on the night in question, with a 6-week-old infant, in severe winter conditions, what was your primary concern?" Clara looked at the judge. She thought about all the ways she could answer the question, all the careful framings, all the legally useful language Whitfield had given her over the past 3 weeks. Then she said what was true. Getting Rose away from him, she said. That was the only thing I was thinking about. Not myself. Just her. The room was very quiet. Judge Hargrove looked at her for another moment. Then she looked at the papers in front of her, and then she looked at Victor, and it was a brief look, unremarkable in duration. But Clara had learned to read the small things in faces, and what she read in that look was a judge who had made up her mind. Hargrove granted temporary custody to Clara. She issued a restraining order requiring Victor to stay 100 miles from Clara and Rose pending the full hearing. She noted for the record that the documentation presented raised questions that warranted further investigation, including into the circumstances surrounding Margaret Hale's death 20 years prior, and that she was referring those questions to the appropriate authority. She said all of this in the measured, procedural language of judicial proceedings, without drama. And Clara sat in her chair and listened to each sentence and felt the weight of the past 3 years shifting on her, not lifting entirely. It would not lift entirely, she knew that. This was not the end of the legal fight. Victor still had money, and Carver would appeal and there would be more hearings. But shifting, moving from something that was crushing her to something she was carrying, which was a different thing and a survivable one. She heard Caleb exhale behind her, and she did not turn around, but she felt it. Well, outside the courthouse, in the thin March sunlight that had come out from behind clouds sometime during the proceedings. The group of people who had come gathered on the steps without planning to and stood together in the particular aftermath of something that had demanded a lot and then delivered something back. May squeezed her arm. Frances said something Clara couldn't quite hear. Louise Alderman, true to form, said nothing but met her eyes and gave that same single nod. Thomas Greer said, "I'll be at the full hearing if you need me," and then went to his wagon with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had done what needed doing and saw no reason to make a ceremony of it. Abel Cross said, "I'll follow up on the Harmon letter," and looked like he meant it. Henry Dyers came out last, and Clara did not know he was behind her until she turned around and found him standing 2 steps below her with his hat in both hands, and his face doing the complicated thing that Caleb had described. The face of a man who had put something down after carrying it too long and was not yet sure what it felt like to be without the weight. She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something and wasn't sure he'd found the right words yet, and then he just said, "I'm sorry I didn't do it sooner," and put his hat on and walked to his horse. She watched him go. Caleb was standing at the bottom of the steps. She went down to him, and they stood on the courthouse steps in the March sunlight, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "It's not over," she said. "No. He'll appeal. He'll keep fighting. Probably. It could be a year, maybe more." Caleb looked at her. "I know." She looked at him. She thought about the things she had been storing, all the things she had been putting in that interior place where she kept what she wasn't ready for yet. She thought about Rose smiling at his face. She thought about the note on the table, back by afternoon, stoves loaded, and the way she had put it in her pocket and kept it there for 4 days without quite understanding why. She thought about Eleanor and James, about what it meant to let yourself expect things again when you had lost so much that stopping the expecting had felt like the only way to survive the loss. "I don't know what I'm doing," she said. It came out more plainly than she intended. "About what?" She looked at him. "About any of this. About what happens after. About—" She stopped. "I was married to a man who made me feel like I didn't know my own mind. I'm still not always sure which of my instincts are mine and which ones are just the damage. Which things I'm thinking clearly about." Caleb looked at her steadily. "What are you thinking about right now?" She looked at him for a long moment. "That I don't want to go to my sister's," she said. He was very still. "That's probably the wrong thing to say," she said. "It's probably too soon, and it's probably not fair to you, and I'm probably—" "Clara. Not thinking about this clearly because I've been through a—" "Clara." His voice was quiet, but it stopped her. "I'm not in a hurry. You don't have to decide anything today." He looked at her with those dark, steady eyes, and what was in them was not urgency or expectation, but just patience, and something that had been growing quietly in the space between them for weeks and had stopped trying to hide. "But for what it's worth, when I said let's go home last Saturday, I meant my house. I meant He stopped himself. He looked faintly annoyed at his own difficulty with it. "I'm not good at this," he said. I know, she said. Neither am I. We could be bad at it together, he said. For a while, until we figure it out. She looked at him. She thought about what it cost to expect things. She thought about Rose. She thought about the photograph on the mantel and the closed door that Caleb had opened one afternoon while she was in the kitchen, and left open for the first time in 6 years. Just that, just the door standing open, nothing dramatic, just the small, enormous act of deciding the room didn't need to stay sealed. She thought about the fact that some things only ever teach you one lesson, and the lesson is simply this: that you can survive the worst of what happens to you and come out the other side still capable of choosing, still capable of wanting something, still capable of walking toward it, even when walking toward it is terrifying. All right, she said. He nodded. He didn't reach for her, and she was glad because she wasn't there yet, and he seemed to understand that without being told, which was the thing about Caleb that she had been learning since the first night, that he had the quality of knowing what a person needed before they said it, not in the controlling way that Victor had used as surveillance, but in the way of someone who was paying genuine attention, which was a different thing entirely, and one of the rarest things she had encountered in her life. Spring came. It came the way spring comes in that part of the country, which is not gently. It comes fighting winter for every degree and losing for a while and then winning all at once, so that the land goes from white to mud to sudden green in what feels like 2 weeks. The cottonwood at the corner of Caleb's fence got its leaves back. The lane dried out. The morning stopped being dangerous. Rose learned to sit up in April and spent most of May engaged in the serious project of getting to her feet, pulling herself upright against chair legs and table legs, and once, memorably, the leg of Caleb's work pants while he was standing at the kitchen counter, which caused him to look down at her with an expression that Clara caught from across the room and had to turn away from quickly. The full custody hearing was in June. Whitfield had spent 3 months building the case, and the investigation into Margaret's death had produced a coroner's report that the original inquest had not included, a report that a different coroner, one not employed by a friend of Victor's, found troubling in its conclusions. It was not enough to charge Victor with anything. It might never be enough for that. But it was enough, in the context of everything else, to paint a picture that a judge could not dismiss. Victor came to the hearing with Carver and 2 new lawyers, and the bearing of a man who still believed in his own version of events, which Clara thought was possibly the most frightening thing about him. Not that he was lying, but that he had lived inside his story long enough that he believed it. The hearing lasted 2 days. Clara testified on the first day. She sat in the witness chair, and she told the truth, the whole truth this time, clearly and specifically, and without the protective vagueness she had used for years to survive. She did not cry. She did not perform. She said what had happened, and she let the documented evidence support it. And she did not look at Victor the entire time she was speaking, not because she was afraid of him, but because he was no longer the audience that mattered. Dyers testified on the second day. It was more composed than Clara had expected, and less certain. There were moments where you could see the cost of it on his face, the awareness of what he was giving up, the weight of 12 years ending in a courthouse. But he didn't stop. He said what he'd seen. He said it clearly. Dr. Harmon sent a formal written deposition because his health didn't allow him to travel, and Whitfield read it into the record in his precise, unembellished way, and the room was very quiet while he read it. The judge in the full hearing was not Hargrove, but a man named Patton, who was 62 years old and had a reputation for conservatism in family matters. Clara had been nervous about this. Whitfield had been measured about it, which was his form of nervous. Patton ruled on the afternoon of the second day. He awarded full legal custody of Rose to Clara. He cited the documented history of harm, the pattern established by multiple witnesses, and the question surrounding Margaret Hale's death as creating sufficient concern about the character and fitness of the petitioning father. He noted that the mother had demonstrated, under extraordinary circumstances, both the will and the capacity to protect her child. Victor sat at his table while the ruling was read and did not move, and Clara watched him from across the room. This man she had been married to, this man who had controlled her and hurt her, and genuinely believed, she thought, that he had the right to both. And she felt something she had not expected to feel, which was not hatred and not satisfaction, but a kind of exhausted clarity, the feeling of looking at something for what it actually was, rather than what she had needed to pretend it was in order to survive it. He was a man, a damaged, dangerous man who had done real damage to real people and would likely spend the rest of his life not fully understanding why that was wrong. She was not responsible for his understanding. She was not responsible for him at all, not anymore, not in any sense that the law or anyone with reasonable judgment could assign to her. She was done. She walked out of that courthouse into a June afternoon that was warm and full of light, and Caleb was on the steps with Rose on his hip. Rose, who had objected vigorously to being left with him during the proceedings, and had apparently made her feelings known at some volume based on the look on his face when Clara came out. And when Rose saw Clara, she reached for her with both arms and the whole-body urgency that babies have, that complete expression of wanting, and Clara took her and held her and stood in the June sunlight and breathed. Caleb looked at her. "It's done," she said. He looked at her the way he looked at her sometimes, the way she had gotten used to without entirely knowing when that had happened, with that particular steadiness, that quality of attention that was not performance but was just him, just what he was, a man who was present for things in a way that most people weren't. "Come on," he said. "May's making dinner." She laughed. She had been doing that more, laughing without expecting to, the way you do when something that had been locked has started to open, and you can't always predict what will come out. They walked down the steps together, and Rose grabbed a fistful of Clara's hair and held on, and the afternoon stretched ahead of them, ordinary and enormous. There is a thing that people don't tell you about survival, which is that the hardest part is not getting through the worst of it. The hardest part is what comes after, when the crisis ends and the ordinary days begin, and you have to figure out who you are when you're not just trying to stay alive. When you have to make choices that aren't about survival, but about living, which is a different and more complicated thing. Clara had spent 3 years surviving Victor, and 1 month escaping him, and 3 months fighting him in courtrooms and in community rooms, and in her own head. She was good at surviving. She had become very good at it. What she was still learning, what she was learning every day in the ordinary hours of a life that was slowly, imperfectly becoming hers, was how to be a person who expected things. How to wake up in a house that had a lamp in the window, and a man in the kitchen, and a baby who smiled at both of them, and let herself believe that it was real, and that it was hers, and that it would still be there tomorrow. She did not always manage it. There were mornings when she woke up before the light, and lay there in the particular silence of the ranch, and felt the old vigilance kick in, that trained watchfulness, and had to consciously tell herself that the silence meant nothing was wrong, that silence was allowed to be just silence now. There were days when Caleb did something ordinary, crossed the room, reached past her for something, raised his voice at nothing important, and she felt her body brace before her mind could catch up and explain. Those things were slow to leave. She expected they would be slow. She had not been intact when she arrived, and healing was not the same thing as returning to what you were before, because what you were before was gone, and something else was growing in its place, something that had the old shape in some places, and was entirely different in others, something that she was still learning to recognize as herself. But there was this. On a Thanksgiving morning, almost exactly 9 months after the night she had stumbled into a stranger's barn in a blizzard, Clara stood in the kitchen of the Whitmore Ranch and watched Caleb Whitmore teach Rose to stand unsupported in the middle of the floor, his big hands hovering an inch from her sides, ready to catch her, but not catching, letting her find her balance on her own. Rose stood. She wobbled. She grabbed his finger. She stood again. She laughed, that total baby laugh that had no self-consciousness in it, no awareness of itself, just the pure experience of a thing being good. Clara watched them and felt the thing she had been slowly learning to let herself feel, not the cautious half-hoping of someone waiting for the other shoe, but something fuller, something that had taken root in the ordinary days and grown without her entirely noticing, the way things grow when you stop guarding against them. She turned back to the stove before Caleb could catch her watching. He knew, anyway. He always knew. That was his particular quality, and she had stopped being unsettled by it and started being grateful, which was its own kind of change, its own evidence of something. Outside, the November light was coming in clear and cold over the land, over the cottonwood tree that had gone gold and mostly bare, over the lane where she had once expected Victor Hale to appear and had faced whatever came instead. The same land, different in every way that mattered. She put the coffee on and listened to Rose laugh and let herself stay in the moment, which was its own small act of courage. Not the dramatic kind, not the courthouse kind, but the kind that most people have to practice every day without anyone calling it by the right name. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything she had ridden through a blizzard to get to.